Hey everyone! Today, I thought we'd try out a little science experiment. Now, not long ago, I was gifted this nice big old chunk of turquoise. Or so they claimed. Now I have some reason to believe that this chunk of turquoise might actually be a fraud. So let's see today if we can solve the mystery of the fraudulent turquoise. Now you may be saying, Robin, this is clearly a turquoise stone. Why would you have any doubt that these are some turquoise pieces? And I have a couple of suspicions. Number one is the sourcing. And while I'm not 100% confident, I do believe this is probably from Temu. The person that gave it to me loves to shop on Temu. And I do think you have to consider the source. Number two, the coloration. Notice these sort of greenish yellow spots. You can really see it on this one, and less so on the smallest piece. The dye, as I suspect, is uneven. And that could be the polish or wax that's mixing with the dyeing process. But one thing that makes me think it's not that is if you'll notice all the cracks here. It's very natural for turquoise to have this sort of darker coloration in the cracks. However, in this part, there's no gray part, and you can sort of see almost a royal blue color drawn on. And that would be where the dye has sort of pulled in those chip areas. That's my suspicion, at least. Now, I suspect this is probably dyed howlite. That's what a lot of fake turquoise is, which is a white stone. So we have a few ways we're going to check and see if this is actually dyed howlite. Let's start experiment number one. Now for experiment number one, I thought we'd try a scratch test. Turquoise and howlite are two different hardnesses. Now this experiment could be thrown off if this isn't in fact howlite and is some other dyed stone, but howlite is only around a 3 to 3.5 on the Mohs hardness scale, whereas turquoise is at 5.5, meaning that turquoise should be able to scratch glass. So let's test this out. As you can see, that left no mark. Now I do have a real piece of turquoise here from my friend Jerry. This is Pinto Valley turquoise. Yes, you can see it's not as vibrant, but if my theory is correct, it should be able to scratch the glass. And while it's a little faint, you can see that it successfully scratched the glass. Just for the sake of argument, let's try the big one. Nothing. Now for our next experiment, I've got a bottle of 100% acetone, I've got my rocks, and I've got my Q-tips. What we're going to do is wet the Q-tips in our 100% acetone, we're going to rub it on the rocks, and we're going to see if we get any dye on them. Now, because these are so heavily polished and almost like with a waxy polish, it's possible that no dye will come off from the Q-tip experiment. But that doesn't mean we can't figure out if it's howlite or not. We still have another test after this one. Alright, so my Q-tip is covered in acetone. What we're going to do is we're going to rub on the same spot for a couple of seconds. I want to do it in the same spot because I want to give it the best shot to get through the sort of waxy polish. The acetone should eat through any sort of polish or wax that's on there, but it may not be enough time rubbing it with a Q-tip. Nothing. Alright, now, I thought we'd try it in these cracks because I'm a little suspicious of them. And if I'm correct, then the dye should be pulling up underneath this sort of grayish area. Which means it's more concentrated, which, you know, hopefully means that we can get some dye off. Oh, I can see it. I can see it, guys. I can't believe it's working. Okay. Now, as you can see, we now have turquoise and almost a little bit of green, which I suspect is the sort of grayish area coming off because I believe that's also artificial. So what's happening is the dye is coming off. It's concentrated in the cracks and it's more easily coming off here. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily that it's not turquoise, but now we definitely know that it's dyed. Some people dye rocks to make them even brighter. Brighter colors are thought of as more desirable. So it's possible that this is still turquoise, but maybe it was a light piece of turquoise. You know, you saw our Pinto Valley one. It's almost like a light greenish. It's beautiful in its own way, and I would prefer it in its natural state. But maybe this is still turquoise. Maybe it was just low grade, and do we have any way we can find out? Let's try experiment number 3. Now for experiment number 3, we're going to let these rocks soak in acetone. We've got a glass jar for safety. We're going to pour this 100% acetone in very carefully. And we're going to plop the stones in. Now, as you can see, I've added the stones, I added some additional acetone, and now we're going to let them soak. Now for the 10-minute update, I thought we'd go against a white wall so that we could see quite how blue the water is. This is just after 10 minutes, and as you can see, the rocks look like they're getting a little whiter, not too much. The dye is pretty in there, especially on the big one. Let's give it another 20 minutes. Now coming in at the 30-minute mark, I'm seeing something very interesting here, which is that the gray areas, especially on the side of our big rock, are starting to come clean. Just as I sort of suspected, that gray is not natural. It's painted on to make this, probably howlite, look more like natural turquoise. Now, our more spotted stone is pretty conclusive at this point. If you look here, it's turning pretty much white right away, which gives me a pretty strong conclusion, as these were all from the same gift, that all 3 of these are howlite. They just have different levels of dye. The dye absorption on this one was particularly bad. Now for our little one, it's harder to tell right now in the water. It had a really even dye absorption. There were no real spots in it that you could tell had this sort of interaction with the polish. So it was more solid blue, but what we can see is what looks like is happening from inside the jar is sort of around the corners right here. It looks like it's getting lighter here first. I don't know what to draw from that, but I feel like we can pretty safely say this is certainly not turquoise. Let's check back in 30 more minutes to see if anything's changed. I actually ended up waiting 3 hours, and at this point, it's looking a lot more like glycerine. All right, now I've taken the stones out of the acetone. And as you can see, it's definitely worn off the sort of waxy finish. The blue is still there, and we would probably have to let it soak for several days for all of that blue to be gone. We're starting to see this gray really wear away. We're definitely seeing less blue, a lot more yellow coming through, although we had a little bit of that. The smaller stone with the most uneven dye is sort of reminding me of when you dye eggs on Easter and you break open the shell and the center of the egg, the hard-boiled egg, is colored. That's about what this looks like. It's definitely had a lot of the blue come out of it. The dye did not penetrate very well on this one from the beginning, so it's coming out very quickly. I would assume in 24 hours, this would be fully white. And I feel pretty confident this is probably howlite. Interestingly, the smallest stone, and certainly the most evenly dyed one, it was pretty solid all the way through. It did have this one crack, which is now, as you can see, the gray is still pulling away. Now you're starting to see some uneven dye right here. But overall, it's pretty solidly turquoise still. The dye really penetrated on this one. And had I not had the 2 other rocks from the same batch, I might assume that, you know, maybe I was wrong about this one. However, with it being from the same batch of rocks, I have to assume this is also Howlite. So what do you think? Do you agree with me? Is this Howlite? Or are you convinced this is still turquoise? Either way, let me know down in the comments. Have you ever been fooled by a rock? Have you ever been gifted a fake rock? Are there any rocks you'd like me to test? Leave them down in the comments. Let me know. Let me know what you think of my experiments. If there's anything else you'd like me to do or anything else you'd like to see. Otherwise, I'll just see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.